I got to the Metropolitan Museum of History 15 minutes early for my first night shift. The big building felt different after hours, all dark corners and empty silence where the crowds had been during the day. My steps made noise against the marble floors as I walked to the security office. Thomas was waiting for me, his security uniform old, but neat. He looked about 60, with deep wrinkles on his face and gray-streaked hair cut short. He barely looked up from his papers when I knocked on the door. "Alexander Mitchell?" he asked, his voice like gravel. "That's me. You can call me Alex." Thomas grunted, getting to his feet with a slight wince. Not much for orientation. Night shift's simple enough. Walk the floors, check the locks, report anything unusual. I nodded, taking the flashlight and radio he pushed across the desk. This job seemed straightforward, exactly what I needed while finishing my criminal justice degree. The pay was decent, and night hours meant uninterrupted study time between rounds. There's something else. Thomas pulled a folded paper from his breast pocket. "Museum rules. Learn them." I unfolded the paper, expecting standard procedures about alarm systems or emergency exits. Instead, I found a handwritten list. 1. Never remain in one exhibit for more than 7 minutes between midnight and 4 a.m. 2. Do not unlock any door that's already locked, especially after 3 a.m. 3. If you hear music, follow it immediately. 4. Avoid direct eye contact with anything that shouldn't move. 5. Guide any wandering children to the nearest exit. 6. If you hear your name called, do not respond. I laughed, waiting for Thomas to crack a smile. He didn't. "This some kind of joke, hazing the new guy?" Thomas's eyes narrowed. "Those aren't suggestions, Mitchell. They're survival tactics." I folded the paper and tucked it into my pocket. "Right. Don't talk to the exhibits. Got it. Mock if you want," he said, checking his watch. "I'll be back at dawn. You patrol every 2 hours. Start at 11. He showed me the monitoring station with its wall of security camera feeds, then handed me a ring of master keys. Before leaving, he paused at the door. "Just follow the rules, Mitchell. Every one of them." After he left, I settled into the creaky office chair and pulled out my textbook. The whole building felt different now, not just quiet, but waiting. I tried to focus on my studying, but my eyes kept looking at that folded paper in my pocket. At 11 p.m., I started my first patrol. The museum was grand during the day, but at night my flashlight made weird shapes on the walls that changed as I walked around. My footsteps sounded too loud. Display cases shined under emergency lighting, their glass catching reflections that made the exhibits inside seem to move. I walked through the American History Wing first. My flashlight lit up a collection of Civil War uniforms, the brass buttons catching the light. Nothing out of place. The Renaissance Wing was next. Paintings lined the walls. Marble statues stood frozen in dramatic poses. By midnight, I was feeling more confident, even bored. I'd finished most of my first complete walkthrough and found nothing scarier than my own shadow. The rules seemed pretty silly by now. That's when I saw it. I was passing through a narrow gallery of Italian sculptures when something caught my eye. I stopped, pointing my flashlight back to a marble nobleman with a cape and sword. He stood as still as he had for centuries. I took a step forward, and the statue's head turned, just slightly, but enough that its blank eyes now followed me. I felt a rush of panic. I backed away, remembering Rule 4. Avoid direct eye contact with anything that shouldn't move. I looked at the floor instead of the statue's face and kept backing up until I reached the doorway. When I looked up again, the nobleman was facing forward, exactly as he should be. I checked my watch. 12:08 a.m. I suddenly remembered Rule 1 about not staying in exhibits too long after midnight. My hands shook as I marked the gallery on my clipboard. In the American History Wing again, I tried to convince myself I'd imagined the statue moving. Maybe I was tired or the shadows were playing tricks. I was almost believing it when I heard something new. "Alexander." The whisper came from the dark corner behind a display of frontier tools. Soft, curious, like someone testing if I was listening. "Alexander Mitchell." I froze, remembering Rule 6. If you hear your name called, do not respond. I pressed my lips together and kept walking, slightly faster now. The whisper followed me, growing more insistent. "Alexander. We see you, Alexander." I grabbed my radio, pressing the talk button. "Thomas, you there?" Only static answered, a harsh crackle that bounced through the quiet hall. I tried twice more before giving up. By 2 a.m., I was on my third round, checking each gallery as quickly as I could while still being thorough. The European artifacts section was next: medieval weapons, ornate furniture, and glass cases of coins and jewelry. That's when I saw him. A small boy standing by a display of 18th century toys. He wore short pants with suspenders over a buttoned shirt, like something from an old photograph. His hair was neatly combed, and he looked at the toy soldiers with obvious longing. "Hey," I called softly. "The museum's closed. How did you get in here?" The boy looked up, not startled, but not quite focused on me either. His eyes seemed older than his face. "Are you lost?" I asked, approaching slowly. He didn't answer, just watched me with those strange eyes. I remembered Rule 5. Guide any wandering children to the nearest exit. "Let's get you out of here, okay? Your parents must be worried." I didn't reach for him, just gestured toward the exit. "This way." The boy followed without resistance, his footsteps making no sound on the marble floor. We walked together to the east door, and I pushed it open, holding it for him. "Go on," I said. "The night guard will help you find your parents." He stepped through the doorway and was gone, not running off into the darkness, but just disappearing. One moment a solid little boy, the next, nothing. I let the door fall shut, my hands numb with shock. I'd just guided a ghost to the exit. The rest of the night passed in a blur of being super alert. Every shadow might be moving, every reflection possibly watching. I checked my watch constantly, never staying anywhere near 7 minutes. I kept my back to walls whenever possible. When the first gray light of dawn came through the high windows, I almost cried with relief. I hurried back to the security office, my report filled with normal expected things. Not statue turned its head, or ghost child disappeared. Just all secure, repeated for each section. Thomas returned at 6 a.m. exactly, looking no more rested than when he'd left. He glanced at my pale face and the coffee cups littering the desk. "Quiet night?" he asked, hanging up his jacket. I started laughing, a slightly hysterical sound. A statue moved. It watched me walk by, and there was a little boy who vanished when I showed him out, and voices knew my name. I pushed my hands through my hair. I'm not crazy. I know what I saw. Thomas didn't look surprised or disbelieving. He just nodded slowly. "You followed the rules," he said simply. "That's why you're still here." For several seconds, I couldn't find words. Thomas just stood there looking at me with tired, knowing eyes. He wasn't surprised. He wasn't laughing at me. He believed me. "So, everything on that list, it's all real?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Thomas checked his watch. "Go home, Mitchell. Get some sleep." "But the boy, he vanished, and the statue..." I said go home. Thomas walked to the desk and began sorting through paperwork, his back to me. Our conversation was over. I grabbed my jacket and backpack, legs unsteady as I walked out. The morning light hit my face as I stepped outside, and somehow that normality, birds singing, traffic noise, people walking to work, made last night feel even more unreal. I spent the day in my apartment staring at the ceiling, my brain running through everything I'd seen. A moving statue, voices that knew my name, a child who disappeared into thin air. None of it made sense. Any rational person would quit. I should call right now and tell them I wasn't coming back. But something pulled at me. The mystery of it, the strangeness. The fact that Thomas had practically confirmed it all without explaining anything. I dozed off eventually, dreams full of strange faces watching me and whispers I couldn't quite hear. When my alarm went off at 8 p.m., I sat up with a jolt. I had 2 hours before my shift started. I showered, dressed, and caught myself staring at the museum's folded rules I'd left on my kitchen counter. I tucked them into my pocket and headed out. The museum closed to the public at 9 p.m. I arrived 20 minutes early, passing the last visitors being ushered toward the exits. Instead of going straight to the security office, I took a detour toward the administrative wing. The museum curator's office door stood half open, light coming into the hallway. A woman sat at the desk, head bent over papers spread across its surface. According to the nameplate, this was Sarah Mitchell, head curator. I knocked lightly on the doorframe. "Excuse me?" She looked up, startled. Mid-30s, dark hair pulled back in a neat bun, glasses on her nose. Her office had books and display cases with small artifacts. "Sorry," I said. "I'm Alex Mitchell, the new night guard. Just started yesterday." "Mitchell? Any relation?" She gestured to her nameplate with a small smile. "Not that I know of. Common name, I guess." She nodded, removing her glasses. "How can I help you, Mr. Mitchell? You're not on shift yet, are you?" "Not for another hour. I wanted to ask you something if you don't mind." Sarah set her pen down. "Of course." I stepped into her office, trying to sound casual. "Has anyone ever mentioned unusual things happening here at night?" Her hands stopped moving on the desk. "Unusual in what way?" "Like exhibits not being where they're supposed to be, or noises that can't be explained." I paused. "Or children in the building after hours." Sarah's face changed a little. Her eyes got tight. She stood up and walked to her office door, looked into the hallway, then closed it. "This building has stood for over 150 years, Mr. Mitchell. It has a complex history." She returned to her desk. "Why do you ask? Did you experience something last night?" I weighed how much to say. Thomas gave me a list of rules, pretty strange rules. Thomas has worked here longer than anyone. She picked up a small artifact from her desk, some kind of stone scarab, turning it over in her fingers. "The building makes noises. Pipes, settling foundation, climate control systems. Security can be an unsettling job, especially overnight." She was being careful. Too careful. "So the rules are just precautions? Nothing more?" Sarah put the scarab down and met my eyes. "The rules keep people safe. That's all you need to know right now." That "right now" hung in the air between us. "I should get ready for my shift," I said finally. She nodded. "If you experience anything unusual, Mr. Mitchell, document it in your log. That's protocol." "Protocol for what?" She didn't say. Thomas was already in the security office when I arrived, looking at camera feeds. He grunted hello, but didn't bring up our earlier conversation. "Anything I should know about tonight?" I asked. "Same as yesterday. Patrol every 2 hours. Follow the rules." He emphasized those last 3 words, giving me a hard look. Every one of them. Once Thomas left, I pulled out the rules list, reading it twice more. Tonight would be different. I needed to know what was happening in this museum, and that meant testing boundaries. My first patrol at 11 p.m. was uneventful. I checked each gallery methodically, marking my clipboard with timestamps. No moving statues, no ghosts, no whispers. By midnight, I'd completed my first full round and returned to the security office. On my monitor, the Native American exhibit looked quiet and still. That would be my first test. Rule number 1, never remain in one exhibit for more than 7 minutes between midnight and 4 a.m. I grabbed my flashlight and headed there directly, checking my watch as I entered the gallery. 12:08 a.m. The exhibit housed pottery, weapons, traditional clothing, and several ceremonial masks mounted on the wall behind glass. I planted myself in the center of the room, counting down minutes. 5 minutes passed with nothing happening. The room remained silent except for the sound of climate control. At 6 minutes, the air felt heavier. 6 minutes and 30 seconds, and the glass display case nearest to me began to vibrate. So slightly I thought I imagined it, until it grew more intense. 7 minutes exactly. The temperature dropped suddenly, my breath forming a small cloud. The glass case housing a ceremonial mask unlocked itself with a soft click. 7 minutes and 20 seconds. The case door swung open. The painted wooden mask, shaped like a hawk with bright red and black markings, lifted from its stand. It didn't fall. It floated, hovering at the height where a person's face would be. "Holy shit," I whispered, backing toward the doorway. The mask turned slowly like it was checking me out. It moved forward, floating in the air. No strings, no mechanism, totally impossible. At 8 minutes, I broke and ran. Behind me, I heard a wooden clatter as the mask dropped to the floor. I rushed to the American History Wing and leaned against a wall, checking my watch. I'd broken rule number 1 and seen what happens. The rules weren't jokes or made-up stories, they were warnings. After catching my breath, I continued my patrol. The Greek and Roman gallery was quiet and still. The Renaissance wing looked normal, artifacts safely behind glass. Then I heard it. The high, sweet notes of a violin. Not recorded music from speakers, but real violin music. Rule number 3. If you hear music, follow it immediately. I moved toward the sound, which led me down a corridor I hadn't explored yesterday. The violin played a sad tune that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I followed it past the medieval Europe exhibit, through a narrow hall lined with paintings. The music got louder as I approached a small maintenance closet tucked between 2 larger galleries. As I reached for the knob, the violin stopped. I waited, listening. Nothing. Something made me turn around. 20 feet behind me, a suit of medieval armor stood in the hallway. It hadn't been there seconds ago. As I watched, its empty helmet turned slowly from side to side, like it was looking for something. The armor took one clanking step forward. I yanked open the closet door and hurried inside, pulling it shut behind me. The small space was full of cleaning supplies, mops, buckets, bottles of solution. I held my breath, listening to metal footsteps pass by the door and continued down the hall until I couldn't hear them anymore. When I finally stepped out, the hallway was empty. No armor, no music. Rule number 3 had saved me from whatever that was. I finished my patrol, checking my watch constantly to make sure I never stayed anywhere close to 7 minutes. My 2 a.m. round passed without anything happening, though every shadow made me jump. At 3 a.m., I was passing the Egyptian wing when I heard it. A dull thud from behind the locked double doors. Then another, like something hitting the door from inside. Rule number 2. Do not unlock any door that's already locked, especially after 3 a.m. The banging continued, getting more insistent. My flashlight beam showed the "closed for renovation" sign on the door. According to the museum map, this was one of their largest exhibits, temporarily closed for updates. I should walk away. The rules had proven themselves twice tonight. Another bang, louder this time. My curiosity felt stronger than my fear. What was in there? I pulled out the master keys Thomas had given me, finding the one marked E-Wing. The banging stopped as I put the key into the lock. I knew this was stupid. I turned the key anyway. The massive double doors swung inward with a groan. My flashlight showed a huge room filled with display cases, stone tablets carved with hieroglyphics, and reconstructed tomb entrances. At the center stood a large sarcophagus, its lid slightly open. I stepped inside, my footsteps hitting the stone floor. The doors swung closed behind me with a loud click. "Hello?" My voice sounded small in the vast space. Nothing moved. No response. I walked up to the sarcophagus slowly, my flashlight pointing at its decorated surface. The lid had definitely been moved. Not enough for whatever was inside to get out, but enough to see that the mummy case was empty. No mummy, just strips of linen bandages piled inside. As I watched, one bandage twitched, then another. The strips began to move, rising from the case like they were alive. They twisted in the air, coming together, slowly making a body, arms, legs, a chest. A person-shaped thing building itself right in front of me. I remembered Rule No. 4. Avoid direct eye contact with anything that shouldn't move. Looking down at the floor, I backed away. My heel caught on something and I tripped, grabbing a display case to keep from falling. When I looked up without thinking, the bandage thing had gotten closer, now only 10 feet away. Where a face should be was just a hollow space of crossed bandages, but somehow I felt it watching me. I kept backing up, eyes fixed on the floor until my back hit the doors. I fumbled for the handle, twisted it, and fell backward into the hallway as the doors opened. I slammed them shut and locked them with shaking hands. The banging from inside started again immediately, harder and faster than before. I ran all the way back to the security office, collapsed into the chair, and watched the Egyptian wing doors on the monitor. The camera showed the hallway outside the exhibit, the doors firmly closed. No sign of what I'd seen inside. The banging had stopped. By morning, my report sheet was filled with lies, all secure in every section, including the ones where impossible things had happened. I wasn't ready to put any of it in writing. When Thomas returned at 6 a.m., I was a mess of adrenaline and exhaustion. "How'd it go?" he asked, hanging up his jacket. "The rules," I said, my voice rough. "I tested them." Thomas went very still. "And?" "The mask in the Native American exhibit, it flew." I swallowed hard. "The music led me away from something, and the Egyptian wing, I broke Rule 2. I unlocked it." Thomas's face darkened. "God damn it, Mitchell. Those rules aren't suggestions." "I know that now. But what are they? What's happening in this museum? That kid last night, he vanished. And tonight, those bandages." "You survived," Thomas cut me off. "That's what matters. The rules work if you follow them. But why? What are we guarding against?" Thomas sank into his chair, suddenly looking every one of his 50-something years. "Not what, who?" He rubbed his face. "Go home, Mitchell. Decide if you're coming back tonight. If you do, no more testing. No more breaking rules." "There's something you're not telling me." "There's plenty I'm not telling you," he snapped. "And for your sake, better it stays that way." I left with more questions than answers, but one thing was clear. Those rules weren't just made-up stuff. They were warnings from people who learned the hard way, maybe even fatally. The museum had things to hide, and even after everything I'd seen, I knew I'd be back tonight to find out more. 3 days had gone by since what happened in the Egyptian exhibit. I hadn't quit, though I'd thought about it every minute I was awake. What I saw made no sense. A floating mask, moving bandages, walking armor, and a ghost boy who disappeared into thin air. I needed answers, not more rules to blindly follow. I called in sick for my day classes. No way could I focus on criminal justice lectures when everything I knew had been flipped around. Instead, I went to the city library, a big stone building with old steps that smelled like books. The reference section was almost empty on a weekday morning. I found a quiet corner and pulled up the library's newspaper archives on a computer. My hands stopped over the keyboard for a second before I typed, "Metropolitan Museum of History Founding." The search gave me dozens of articles. I looked through them until one headline caught my eye. "Morgan Collection Forms Core of New Museum." The article, from 1918, had a black and white photo of a serious man with a neat mustache and sharp eyes. Edward Morgan, rich businessman, had donated most of the museum's original collection. I looked up more about Edward Morgan. More articles showed up. Stories of his trips to Egypt, Greece, and South America, photos of him with tribal artifacts, interviews where he talked about preserving cultural heritage through acquisition. In every photo, he stood straight, wearing fancy suits. Then I found it. A small article from 1928. Tragedy at Metropolitan Museum. Benefactor found dead. According to the story, Edward Morgan had been found dead inside the museum after hours. The official cause was heart failure, but the article mentioned unusual circumstances that weren't explained. He'd been alone in the building, working late on a new exhibition. I printed everything I could find about Morgan and the museum's early years. One photo really stood out. Morgan standing beside a young assistant in front of a crate marked Thebes. Something about their faces made me feel weird. Morgan looked proud while his assistant looked nervous, almost scared. By the time I left the library, my backpack was full of printouts and my head filled with questions. The official history didn't tell me much about what was actually happening in the museum at night, but it gave me somewhere to start. When I showed up for my shift that evening, I had a plan. Thomas nodded at me from the desk, but didn't say anything about me being sick. I waited until he left before getting to work. The security system kept footage for 2 weeks. If I could find recordings of me with the mask, the bandages, or the ghost boy, I'd have proof I wasn't going crazy. I pulled up the footage from my first night, fast-forwarding to when I'd walked the ghost boy to the exit. The camera showed me walking down the hallway alone, making gestures and talking to nothing. When I got to the door, I opened it, stood there for a moment, and then closed it again, looking shocked. My stomach felt tight. I checked the Native American exhibit footage from my second night when the mask had floated. The screen showed static for exactly 8 minutes, the whole time I'd spent in the room, before clearing to show me running out, with the mask lying on the floor behind me. I tried the Egyptian wing footage next. More static, then the doors opening by themselves, then me backing out and slamming them shut, looking scared of nothing. "What the hell?" I whispered, rewinding and replaying the clips. The cameras captured me perfectly, but none of the supernatural events. To anyone watching, I looked like I was hallucinating, talking to thin air, running from nothing. I checked my watch. Time for my first patrol. I grabbed my flashlight and radio, my mind racing as I walked through the museum hallways I'd been through 100 times before. The building was quiet, but I didn't mistake that for emptiness anymore. I felt eyes watching me from every exhibit. The first and second floors were clear. When I got to the third floor's textile exhibit, I heard something new. Soft, muffled crying. I followed the sound past glass cases of tapestries and old clothes to a small alcove with Victorian-era dresses. A girl sat on a bench in the corner, her face buried in her hands. She looked about 11, with long dark hair around her shoulders and a pale blue dress with lace trim that could have been from the 1800s. Unlike Noah, she looked solid, real, until I saw how her dress matched the style in the nearby display cases too perfectly. "Hello?" I said softly, keeping my distance. She looked up, surprised. Her face was streaky with tears, but there was no wetness on her hands. "You can see me." Her voice sounded weird and far away, like it was coming through water. "Yes, I'm Alex, the night guard. Are you lost?" A bitter smile spread across her face. "Lost? I guess that's one way to put it." She stood up and smoothed her dress. "My name is Lucy." "Lucy," I repeated. "Like Noah, you're not really here, are you? Noah spoke to you?" She looked surprised. "He's cautious around the guards." "He showed me out of an exhibit," I said. "What did you mean by lost?" Lucy walked to a glass case with a child sampler dated 1889. This was mine. I made every stitch. She touched the glass, her fingers passing through it slightly. "He took it from my mother after I died. Said it would preserve my memory." "Who took it?" "The collector," she whispered, her form flickering slightly. "He collects more than objects, guard. He collects us." My stomach turned cold. "Edward Morgan?" At the name, Lucy's image shook badly. Don't say his name here. He might hear. What did he do to you? To Noah? To all of you? Lucy backed up, looking over my shoulder with worry. He tied us to the things we loved, the things that belong to us. We can't leave them. She lowered her voice. He's still here too, tied like us but stronger. He feeds on us to stay. How can I help you? I asked, moving closer. You can't, she said sadly. Many have tried. The rules keep him contained, but they keep us trapped too. Before I could ask more, Lucy's head snapped up, fear crossing her face. He's listening. I shouldn't have spoken to you. She backed away, her body growing transparent. Be careful who you trust, guard. Even the living aren't always what they seem. With that, she vanished completely, leaving me alone in the textile exhibit, feeling suddenly cold and scared. I completed my patrol in a daze, trying to process Lucy's warning. The collector, Edward Morgan. Somehow he was still here, decades after his death. During my 2 a.m. round, I heard it again, the violin music that had saved me from the animated armor. This time, instead of leading me away from danger, it seemed to be calling me toward something. The melody moved down the hallway of the European wing, getting stronger as I approached a large painting of a Venetian canal scene. The music seemed to be coming from behind the painting itself. I checked the frame carefully, noticing a small gap between it and the wall on one side. When I pressed the frame's corner, the entire painting swung outward like a door, showing a narrow passage beyond. Every survival instinct told me to close it and walk away. But if answers lay beyond, I needed to know. I slipped through the opening into a small, windowless room that couldn't be more than 15 feet square. Unlike the rest of the museum, this space had no track lighting, no climate control systems, no modern touches at all. A single bare bulb hung from the ceiling, activated by my entry. Glass cases lined the walls, but these weren't normal museum displays. They contained personal items, a pocket watch with a cracked face, a set of ivory hairbrushes, a child's doll with one eye missing, a tarnished locket. Each item had a small handwritten card beside it, but instead of historical descriptions, they bore only names and dates. Robert Mills, 1922. Elizabeth Porter, 1919. Samuel Wright, 1925. A wooden desk sat in the middle of the room with leather-bound journals and loose papers all over it. I walked up carefully and shined my flashlight on the papers. They were written by hand in fancy writing, with diagrams and symbols in the margins. I knew the handwriting from Morgan's letters in the library. One of the journals was open to a page called Binding Ritual for Spiritual Containment. The writing talked about ways to secure a departing soul to its cherished possessions. The diagrams showed how to arrange candles and symbols. My hands shook as I turned the pages. Morgan's crazy ideas were all there in neat, careful notes. He wrote about trying different ritual pieces, testing which personal items made the strongest bonds, and writing down how long each spirit stayed viable after binding. They retain consciousness, he'd written. This is key to the transference process. Without awareness, they cannot provide sustenance. I almost dropped the book. Morgan hadn't just collected artifacts. He'd gathered souls, tying them to objects they valued when alive. And somehow, he was using them as food. A noise from the doorway made me turn around. Thomas was standing there with a stern look, staring at the journal in my hands. "You shouldn't be in here," he said quietly. "No one comes in here." I backed up against the desk. "Thomas, these journals, Morgan was trapping souls. Is that what's happening? Are there people trapped in the artifacts?" Thomas came inside and let the painting door close behind him. For a second, I thought he was going to come at me. But instead, he dropped into the chair next to the desk, looking really tired. "Not in the artifacts," he said finally. "With them, bound to what they loved, what they created." He gestured around the room. This was Morgan's private collection, his experiments. Lucy said he feeds on them. How is that possible? He died in 1928. Thomas's head snapped up. You spoke to Lucy, the Victorian girl? I nodded. And Noah, the boy from my first night. They don't usually show themselves to guards, Thomas muttered almost to himself. Then louder, Morgan found a way to bind his own soul to his collection. When he died, or rather, when his body died, he remained tethered to everything he'd gathered. But the binding ritual had consequences. To maintain his presence, he needs energy from the other trapped souls. So the rules, I said, understanding dawning. They're to keep people safe from what's in here. Thomas ran a hand over his face. Yes and no. The rules keep visitors and staff safe, yeah, but they also keep the balance of power. If people break certain boundaries, the spirits can get stronger or weaker. The rules the last night guard taught me, that I taught you, came from years of trial and error by night guards who lived to tell about it. How long has this been going on? Since 1928. After Morgan died, strange things started happening. The first night guard quit after a week. The second one was found catatonic in the Egyptian wing. Eventually, someone figured out patterns, boundaries, rules that kept the worst at bay. I thought of the security footage showing me talking to empty air. The cameras don't pick up any of it. Thomas gave a sad smile. That would have made it easier to convince people, wouldn't it? But no, whatever Morgan did is invisible to technology. Cameras, recordings, they show nothing. Only people can actually see what happens here. We need to tell someone, I insisted. Get help. Tell who? Show them what? Thomas stood up, agitated. I tried years ago. Brought in a paranormal research team. Their equipment failed, they saw nothing, and I nearly lost my job. The museum board isn't about to admit their precious collection is haunted by its original donor who's feeding on trapped souls. Then we free them, I said. Break whatever binding Morgan created. Thomas's expression darkened. Don't you think we've tried? For decades, guards have looked for ways. Some got close. He stopped talking, looking at the artifacts in their cases. They joined the collection. There has to be a way. If there is, it's not worth your life to find it. Thomas moved toward the door. I've already said too much. I only told you because you found this place on your own, and that means Morgan wanted you to know. What? Why would he want that? New blood, new fear. Maybe it amuses him. Thomas opened the painting door. Listen to me carefully, Alex. Follow the rules. Don't try to be a hero. The most we can do is maintain the balance, keep the souls contained, and limit how much power Morgan has over them. That's not good enough, I argued, following him out. Those are people trapped in there. Children, like Noah and Lucy. Thomas stopped in the hallway, turning to face me. You think I don't know that? You think it doesn't haunt me every day? His voice cracked. I've been here for 30 years watching these same ghosts come and go. I've tried everything to help them. Then help me find something we haven't tried, I said. Thomas shook his head. There's no we in this, Mitchell. In this job, you either follow the rules and survive, or you break them and join the exhibits. He started walking away, then paused. One more thing. Don't mention this conversation to anyone. Especially not the curator, Sarah. Why not Sarah? She must know about this. Because I don't know who Morgan can influence outside these walls, Thomas said over his shoulder. Trust no one but yourself, and even then, be careful. He left me standing there, the painting door now shut with no sign it was ever open. I moved closer and looked at it from all angles, but couldn't find any way to open it again. I was locked out of Morgan's private collection once more. As I kept walking around, the museum seemed different, like it wasn't just haunted, but built with a scary purpose in mind. Each exhibit I passed might have someone stuck inside like Noah or Lucy, trapped with things they used to love. The pretty items that visitors liked looking at during the day were actually prisons at night. And somewhere in there, Edward Morgan was still around, living off their imprisonment, watching everything happen. The night seemed way darker now. The rules seemed way less certain. And my job as a guard meant something much worse than before. I wasn't just keeping the museum safe from people breaking in. I was helping maintain a 100-year-old system that kept a collector locked up. A man who'd figured out how to keep his collection forever. People's souls included. I barely slept 4 hours, and what little sleep I got was full of bad dreams about masks floating around and kids disappearing. I kept thinking about what Thomas told me, how Morgan was trapping souls in objects and feeding on them, with these rules keeping some kind of power balance. But who cares about balance if it means kids like Noah and Lucy stay trapped forever? The museum opened at 10 a.m. I showed up at 9:30, tired from working all night. Instead of heading home, I wanted to check out the museum's archive department. The archives took up the basement's east wing, lots of shelves and boxes of documents. I'd walked by during my security rounds, but never gone inside. I looked at the staff directory and found out Daniel Green, the museum's senior historian, worked there. I knocked on the frosted glass door that said Archives, Staff Only. "It's open," called a voice from inside. The room smelled of old paper and bookbinding glue. Tall metal shelves lined the walls, with large tables filling the middle of the room. A man sat at one desk, surrounded by stacks of documents and a really old computer. He looked up when I walked in. He was skinny with glasses that kept sliding down his nose. He wore a rumpled cardigan even though it was pretty hot for early spring. A half-eaten sandwich and 3 empty coffee cups sat next to him. "Can I help you?" he asked, pushing his glasses back up. "I'm Alex Mitchell, the new night guard." "Daniel Green." He turned back to his computer. "If you're looking for the security office, it's back up the stairs and—" "I'm not lost. I need to talk to you about Edward Morgan." His fingers stopped typing. He looked at me over his glasses, looking suspicious. "Morgan's collection is well documented in our public catalog. If you're interested in the museum's history—" "I'm interested in souls bound to artifacts," I said. "In ghosts that appear at night. In why museum guards need 6 rules to survive their shifts." Daniel stared at me for a long moment, then got up and walked to the door. I thought he was kicking me out, but instead he closed it and turned the small lock. "How much do you know?" he asked, his voice low. "I've seen things during my shifts. A boy named Noah who vanished at a doorway. A girl named Lucy in the textile exhibit. I found Morgan's hidden room with the journals about binding rituals." Daniel walked back to his desk, sat down in his chair, and pulled off his glasses. 3 months ago, I would have called security to escort you out. Probably recommended a psychiatric evaluation too." He rubbed his eyes. "But then I found something in the archives that I couldn't explain." He opened a drawer and pulled out an old leather journal. This belonged to Frederick Mills, Morgan's personal assistant during the 1920s. It wasn't put with the official collection. I found it hidden behind a loose panel when we were fixing up the storage area. He handed me the journal. The leather was cracked from age, the pages yellow and brittle. Mills kept really detailed records of everything Morgan did, including things that never made it into the official museum history. I opened it carefully. The handwriting was neat but squished together, filling every bit of space. I flipped through pages about artifact purchases, meetings with collectors, museum planning. Then the entries changed tone. "June 12, 1927, I read aloud. "Mr. Morgan has become obsessed with the Egyptian texts. He speaks of life beyond death, of anchoring the soul to physical objects. I fear his interest has moved beyond scholarly pursuit." I looked up at Daniel. He knew. Daniel nodded. "Keep reading." I turned more pages. The entries grew increasingly disturbed, describing rituals Morgan performed after hours, strange sounds from locked rooms, artifacts that moved without being touched. The final entries really freaked me out. February 3rd, 1928. It works. God help me, it works. I watched Mr. Morgan bind the spirit of the Thompson girl to her sampler. She appeared before us, crying for her mother. Mr. Morgan was ecstatic. I was sick for hours afterward. "The Thompson girl," I said. "Lucy." Daniel's eyebrows rose. "You've seen her? Actually spoken to her?" "Yes. She's in the textile exhibit. She said Morgan took her sampler after she died, that he bound her to it." Daniel looked pale. Mills documented 17 successful bindings before Morgan's death. Children, mostly. Their connection to personal items was stronger, purer, he wrote. But Thomas said Morgan bound himself too, that he feeds on the others somehow. "The last entry," Daniel said, pointing to the final page. "Read it." I turned to it. The writing was shaky, almost frantic. "March 18th, 1928. Morgan is dead, but I fear he is not gone. I found his body in the Egyptian wing, surrounded by candles and symbols drawn in his own blood. The artifacts from his collection were arranged in a circle around him. I should call the police, but who would believe what I've seen, what we've done? I've removed the ritual items, disposed of the candles and other evidence. The official story will be heart failure, but his last words to me still echo. I will become eternal through my collection. God forgive me for my part in this abomination." I closed the journal slowly. So Morgan didn't just bind others. He bound himself. Daniel took the journal back, handling it like it might bite. After finding this, I started looking for patterns. Night guards quitting suddenly or reporting strange experiences. Visitors claiming to see things that weren't there. Staff finding artifacts moved overnight even with all the security systems in place. You believe it? I didn't want to. Still don't, really. Daniel pushed his glasses up again. But the historical record is consistent with something unnatural happening in this building, and you're hardly the first guard to come looking for answers. But I might be the first one who wants to do something about it, I said. Daniel gave me a sharp look. Others have tried. There was a guard in 1943 who brought in a priest, another in 1967 who tried destroying artifacts she believed contained spirits. Both disappeared. Their employee files list them as resigned without notice. But you have more information than they did, I pressed. Morgan's journals, Mills's account. There must be something about how to reverse the binding. Daniel hesitated, then got up and walked to a locked cabinet in the corner. He unlocked it with a small key from his pocket and pulled out several old books with leather covers. I found these in another uncatalogued collection. They appear to be Morgan's research notes on the binding ritual. He set them on the table. I've been translating and studying them in my free time. The museum board doesn't know I have them. I picked up the top journal and opened it. Diagrams covered the pages, circles filled with strange symbols, notes in Morgan's neat handwriting, sketches of artifacts with markings showing where to place them. The binding ritual required 3 elements, Daniel explained, pointing to different sections. A personal item with emotional significance to the subject, a proper containment circle with specific symbols, and blood, both from the binder and the subject. For those already deceased, Morgan used preserved blood or, failing that, something containing their DNA, hair, fingernails, even a pulled tooth in one case. And to bind himself, he created what he called a master binding. Instead of tying his soul to a single object, he bound it to his entire collection. Every artifact, every trapped soul became part of his anchor to this world. I flipped through the pages, seeing detailed notes on each subject, their personal items, how strongly they showed up, how much energy they gave. He was experimenting on them, I said, disgusted, even after death. And still is, if what you've seen is real. Daniel took off his glasses again, cleaning them with a handkerchief. The journals mention that souls bound this way don't just exist, they can be harvested, for lack of a better term. Their energy can be drawn upon by the binder. That's what Thomas meant about Morgan feeding on them, I realized. He's using their energy to maintain his own presence. Exactly. And the more souls he bound, the stronger he became. So how do we unbind them? There must be a reversal ritual. Daniel put his glasses back on. There are references to something called the severing, but those pages were torn out. I've been trying to reconstruct it from references in other sections, but he shrugged. I checked my watch. It was almost noon. I needed sleep before my shift tonight. I need to see those journals again, I said. Can you make copies? Daniel looked nervous. I shouldn't even have shown you these. If the board found out. People are trapped in there, I insisted. Children. They've been trapped for almost a century. He was quiet for a long moment. Come back at 8 tonight before your shift. I'll have copies of the relevant sections ready. Thank you. I stood to leave, then paused. One more thing. Do you know anything about Morgan's personal effects? Things he owned, used regularly? Most were auctioned after his death, but the museum kept some items for historical significance. They should be in deep storage, section E4. He gave me a curious look. Why? Just trying to understand the man behind all this, I said. I walked out of the archives with my head spinning. The truth was worse than I'd imagined. Not just trapped souls in a haunted museum, but a careful, step-by-step system set up by a man who couldn't accept death. I went home and tried to sleep, but my dreams were full of Morgan's diagrams, ghostly children, and rituals done by candlelight. I woke up after only 3 hours, drenched in sweat. My apartment was cool, but that didn't help. By 8 that evening, I was back at the museum. Daniel was waiting at the archive door with a thick envelope. Everything I could find about the binding ritual and possible reversal methods, he said, handing it to me, plus a map marking where we store Morgan's personal items. I appreciate this, I said, taking the envelope. Daniel looked uncomfortable. Just be careful. Whatever Morgan did, it's kept him here for nearly a century. He won't give up his power easily. I know. I tucked the envelope into my jacket. If anything happens to me, don't say that. Daniel cut me off. Just follow the rules tonight. Study the materials first. Don't do anything rash. I nodded and went to the security office for my shift. Thomas was already leaving when I arrived, barely looking at me as we passed each other. Once alone, I spread Daniel's copies across the desk. Morgan's notes were very detailed. He'd created the binding ritual by mixing Egyptian funeral practices with European occult traditions. The diagrams showed how the soul could be stuck to physical objects through symbols drawn in blood. Other pages detailed his experiments with different subjects, how some bindings didn't work, while others created stronger ghost appearances. What really freaked me out were his notes on energy transference. Morgan had figured out that by arranging the bound artifacts in specific patterns, he could take power from the trapped souls to make himself stronger. He used their energy, keeping them weak enough to control but strong enough to keep him going. As time for my first patrol got closer, I gathered the papers and put them away. The museum felt different tonight. I now understood that each exhibit and artifact could be part of Morgan's prison for trapped souls. I walked through the American History Wing, the Renaissance Gallery, and the medieval armor displays. Everything looked the same, but I now realized these weren't just historical objects, but parts of Morgan's supernatural setup. My flashlight showed movement ahead, a small figure peeking from behind a display case. Noah. The ghost boy looked at me with serious eyes. Unlike before, he didn't run away. He stood in the middle of the hallway, waiting. "Hello, Noah," I said softly. He didn't speak but turned and walked down the corridor, looking back to make sure I was following. I checked my watch. 11:48 p.m. I had time before the midnight rules took effect. Noah led me through galleries I'd patrolled every night, down a service stairwell, and into the basement level. We passed storage rooms, the climate control systems, and the archives where I'd met Daniel that morning. At the end of a narrow corridor was a metal door marked Deep Storage E4. I used my master key to unlock it. Noah slipped through the door before I opened it fully, squeezing through the small gap. I followed him into the darkness. My flashlight showed a large room filled with shelves and storage containers. The room was full of museum junk. Old signs, broken display cases, outdated brochures. Along the back wall stood several wooden crates stamped with dates from the 1920s. Noah pointed to one crate in particular. The label read, E. Morgan, Personal Effects, Not for Display. I pried open the lid with a screwdriver from my belt. Inside, packed in yellowed tissue paper, were someone's old personal things. A monogrammed briefcase, a fountain pen set, leather-bound books, a shaving kit, and a silver pocket watch. I picked up the watch right away. It felt heavy, with Morgan's initials carved into it. As I held it, the second hand suddenly twitched and began to move. Tick, tick, tick. This watch should have stopped working decades ago. The storage room got really cold all of a sudden. I could see my breath in front of my face. Noah was gone. He disappeared as soon as the watch started ticking. Curious little things, aren't they? Said a cultured voice behind me. I spun around. A man stood between me and the door, tall, wearing an old-fashioned suit with a waistcoat and tie pin. His face matched the photographs I'd seen. Edward Morgan, looking exactly as he had in 1928, the year of his death. But as I watched, his image glitched like bad reception on an old TV. For a split second, I saw something else beneath the gentleman's outside. A skeleton with empty eye sockets that glowed with cold blue light. "Another guard trying to undo my work," Morgan said, his voice dripping with contempt. He gestured to the watch in my hand. "They always find their way to my personal effects eventually. Something about the connection draws them." I backed up against the crates. "What did you do to those children?" "Preserve them," Morgan replied, straightening his cuffs. "Given them eternal existence. Without me, they would be nothing but dust and forgotten names." "You trap them. You feed on them." Morgan's body flashed again, showing the skeleton beneath. Such dramatic terms. I prefer to think of it as a symbiotic relationship. They provide energy. I provide continued existence. Why? Why do this? Why does any collector collect? Morgan walked toward me, each step leaving a brief frost pattern on the concrete floor. To possess beauty, to prevent the ravages of time, to create something lasting. He smiled, showing too many teeth. And I have succeeded beyond my wildest dreams. My collection will never decay, never be lost. "The rules," I said, remembering why Noah had brought me here. "Thomas said they keep the spirits contained, maintain the balance." Morgan laughed, a harsh sound. "Is that what he told you? That's pretty naive. The rules weren't created to protect you from the spirits, Mr. Mitchell. They were created by my first night guards to protect themselves from me." I felt a shock run through me. "What?" "When I first changed, my influence was limited. I couldn't manifest fully. The guards discovered patterns, times when I was weaker, ways to avoid drawing my attention." Morgan gestured dismissively. "Over the decades, those observations became codified. Rules passed from guard to guard. But they also keep the souls trapped within your power," I realized, horror dawning. "By following the rules, we've been maintaining your prison. Not a prison, Mr. Mitchell. A sanctuary. My sanctuary." Morgan's image solidified, looking more real than before. "Those rules don't contain me. They contain my collection within boundaries I find acceptable. The 7-minute limit in exhibits allows me to maintain control of when and how the bound souls manifest," Morgan finished. "Too long in one place and they grow stronger. more independent. The music that guards are told to follow. A warning system I created to keep trespassers away from areas where I'm conducting maintenance. The truth hit me hard. This whole time, Thomas and the guards before him weren't protecting people from spirits. They were just taking care of Morgan's soul farming business without even knowing it. "Why tell me this?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Because it amuses me." Morgan's form flickered again, momentarily revealing the glowing skeletal figure. Each generation, one guard figures it out, comes down here seeking answers. I find their horror refreshing, a break in the monotony. And then what happens to them? Morgan smiled that too wide smile again. Some quit, some go mad, some try to fight me. He looked at the watch in my hand. And some join my collection. What will you choose, Mr. Mitchell? I gripped the watch tightly. I'm going to free them. Many have tried. All have failed. Morgan's voice hardened. The binding is my life's work. It cannot be undone without destroying the collection itself. I'll find a way. Perhaps. Morgan's form began to fade. But remember, Mr. Mitchell, in this museum I am everywhere. I see through every artifact, hear through every wall. And the rules that you think protect you? His voice became a whisper as he disappeared. They're just the chains I allow you to wear. Then he was gone, leaving me alone in the cold storage room with his ticking watch in my hand. I stood there for several minutes, trying to process what I'd learned. The entire system I'd been told to maintain, the rules, the patrols, the careful balance, was a lie. We weren't containing the haunting. We were facilitating it. Every night, every patrol, every obedience to the rules had been strengthening Morgan's hold over his captured souls. I looked down at the watch, still ticking in my palm. Morgan had revealed his secret, not because he feared me, but because he didn't. In nearly a century, no one had broken his binding. I waited in the security office for Thomas to arrive. The copies of Morgan's journals spread across the desk between us. His eyes moved from the pages to my face, his expression getting harder with each passing second. For the past 10 minutes, I'd been explaining everything. Morgan's binding ritual, how the rules actually maintained his power rather than containing it, how the trapped souls were being used as spiritual batteries. "You talked to Morgan himself," Thomas repeated, his voice flat. "And you believe what he told you." "I saw him, Thomas. He was there, in the storage room with his personal effects. And everything he said matches what's in these journals." I tapped the papers. "The rules don't protect us from the spirits. They protect Morgan's system from interference." Thomas stood up slowly, his chair scraping against the floor. He walked to the office door and closed it with a soft click. "I've worked here for 30 years, he said, his back to me. 30 years, following those rules, teaching them to new guards, watching people quit when they couldn't handle what they saw." "You didn't know," I said. "None of the guards did. Morgan designed it that way." Thomas turned, and the look on his face scared me. His eyes had changed. The pupils had a weird blue light around them, the same blue glow I'd seen on Morgan's skeleton. "What makes you think I didn't know, Alex?" His voice had changed too, deeper and somehow layered, as if someone else spoke just beneath his words. "What makes you think I haven't always known?" I stood up, putting the desk between us. "Thomas, this isn't you. Morgan's influencing you somehow." He laughed. It didn't sound anything like the Thomas I knew. "Morgan showed me the truth years ago, showed me how to really serve." He stepped closer. "And in return, he promised me a spot in his collection when I die. Not locked up, but as a curator, keeping things in check forever." "That's insane," I said, edging toward the door. "You're talking about helping him trap souls. Children's souls." "I'm talking about preservation," Thomas snapped. "What happens to souls otherwise? They disperse, dissolve, whatever happens in death. Morgan gives them continuity, purpose. He feeds on them." He sustains them, Thomas countered, his eyes glowing brighter. And they sustain him, a perfect system that's worked for almost a century. His face twisted with anger, until you started poking around, breaking into private rooms, speaking with Morgan himself. I reached for the door handle, but Thomas moved with surprising speed for his age. His hand clamped around my wrist, painfully tight. "He wants to see you, Alex," Thomas said, his voice almost gentle now. "Tonight, at midnight in the Egyptian wing, he has an offer for you." I tried to pull away. "I'm not interested in any offers." "It's not optional." Thomas's other hand shot out, grabbing me by the throat. "Morgan values intelligence, curiosity. You'd make an excellent addition to the staff." I couldn't breathe. Thomas was stronger than he looked, his fingers digging into my neck with crushing force. My vision started to spot with black dots. Acting on instinct, I drove my knee up hard, catching him in the stomach. Thomas doubled over, his grip loosening. I shoved him back against the desk and bolted for the door, yanking it open and stumbling into the hallway. My throat burned as I gasped for air. Behind me, Thomas was already recovering, pushing himself up from the desk with that unnatural blue glow still burning in his eyes. His face transformed from pain to focused rage. "You can't hide from him," he called as I backed away. "This is his museum, his collection. There's nowhere he can't see." I turned and ran down the hallway, hearing Thomas's footsteps behind me. The museum that had been just creepy before was now a dangerous place to be. I made quick turns through exhibits, trying to lose him, but Thomas knew the place better than I did. Every time I thought I'd gotten away, I'd hear him behind me, his voice calling out with that weird double sound. "He'll find you, Alex. Better to come willingly." I ran into the American Revolution display and hid behind a Valley Forge diorama. I tried to catch my breath while thinking about what just happened. Thomas had been under Morgan's influence all along, or at least for years. That's why he always followed the rules, why he kept warning me, why he said all those weird things. He wasn't trying to keep me safe. He was just keeping Morgan's system going. I needed to get out of the museum and call for help. But who would believe me? Who could actually help against a super old ghost and his mind-controlled security guard? I heard footsteps coming slowly. Thomas was checking each display one by one. He was going to find me soon. I looked around and saw a maintenance door in the wall behind the diorama. I crawled toward it, hoping it wasn't locked. The handle turned when I tried it, and I got inside just as Thomas walked into the exhibit room. The maintenance passage was narrow and dark, with only small emergency lights near the floor. I moved quietly, trying to figure out where I was. These hallways connected all the exhibits to storage and maintenance areas throughout the museum. I followed the passage until I came to a junction with a small map on the wall for staff. There were 3 floors of narrow hallways running through the whole museum. One path went to a supply closet near the curator's office. If I could get there, maybe I could find a phone and call for help. I heard a door open somewhere behind me. Thomas had found the maintenance entrance. I hurried through the narrow hallway, counting junctions until I reached the supply closet. I went inside a large closet full of cleaning supplies, exhibit materials, and tools. I was looking for another way out when the door behind me opened. Thomas stood there, blocking the dim light from the hallway. "End of the line, Alex," he said, stepping inside. I backed away, grabbing a push broom from against the wall, holding it like a staff between us. "Stay back, Thomas. I don't want to hurt you." He laughed. "You still don't understand. Morgan doesn't hurt people. He makes them better, keeps them safe." "He's controlling you somehow," I said, still backing up. "Fight it, Thomas. This isn't you." Something flashed across his face. Doubt, maybe, or a moment of his true self breaking through. But then the blue glow in his eyes got stronger, and he rushed forward, knocking the broom aside. We fought in the small space, knocking over shelves and supplies. Thomas was really strong. but I was younger and faster. I broke free from his grip and shoved him hard against a storage rack. Boxes and cleaning supplies fell down as he stumbled. I used that moment to run through the door, slamming it shut behind me. There was a key in the lock, brass with the museum logo on it. I turned it just as Thomas crashed against the door from inside. "Let me out!" he shouted, pounding on the door. "You can't stop this, Alex. You can't save them." I moved back as Thomas kept screaming and hitting the door. It was metal and wouldn't break easily. I wasn't sure how long it would keep him out, though it gave me some time to think. I needed a plan. Morgan was too strong to fight. The binding ritual holding all those souls had lasted almost 100 years, and let him control Thomas and others. What could I possibly do against that? The journals. Daniel had copied parts about the binding ritual, including stuff about something called the severing. If there was a way to break the ritual, it would be in those notes. But I'd left them all over the desk in the security office. While I tried to figure out what to do next, I heard footsteps coming from around the corner. Not Thomas's heavy steps, but lighter, quicker ones. I put my back against the wall, ready to run again if another security guard under Morgan's control showed up. Sarah Mitchell from the museum came around the corner with a stack of folders in her arms. She stopped when she saw me, her eyes going from my face to the supply closet where Thomas was still shouting from inside. "Alex, what's happening?" she asked, clutching her folders tighter. "Sarah," I gasped, relief flooding through me at seeing a familiar face. "We need to call the police. Thomas attacked me. He's working for Morgan." Her expression changed subtly. "You know about Morgan?" "I know everything," I said. "The binding ritual, the trapped souls, how the rules maintain his power. Morgan himself told me." Sarah set her folders down on a nearby cart, her movements careful, measured. "You've spoken with him directly?" "Last night in the storage room with his personal effects." I gestured to the closet. "Thomas is under his influence, has been for years. We need to get help." "There's no help to get, Alex," she said quietly. "Not from outside. The binding Morgan created can't be broken by conventional means." I stared at her. "How do you know that?" Sarah looked at me, her eyes steady and sad. "Because my family has been trying to break it for 3 generations." She took a deep breath. "My great-grandfather was Frederick Mills, Morgan's personal assistant." The name hit me like a punch to the gut. "Mills? The one who kept the journal about Morgan's experiments?" She nodded. "After Morgan died, or rather after his body died, Mills realized what he'd helped create. He spent the rest of his life trying to undo it, searching for a way to break the binding. My grandfather continued that work. Then my father, now me." "You've known all along what happens here at night," I said, pieces falling into place. "The ghosts, the rules, everything." "Yes." Sarah glanced at the closet door, where Thomas's shouts had subsided to occasional thumps. "I was raised on the truth about this place. I became a historian specifically to work here, to access the collection, to find a way to free those souls." "Why didn't you tell me when I started asking questions?" "Because Morgan has eyes and ears everywhere in this building," she said. "I couldn't be sure you weren't already under his influence, like Thomas, like others before you." She stepped closer. "But you've seen him directly and you're still fighting. That means there's something different about you, something that resists his influence." "I want to help the spirits," I said. "Noah, Lucy, all of them. They don't deserve to be trapped here, feeding Morgan's immortality." Sarah's face softened. "No, they don't." She looked at her watch. "It's nearly midnight. Morgan will be at his strongest soon. We don't have much time." "Time for what?" "For what my family has been preparing for nearly a century." From her jacket pocket, she pulled out a small, worn leather book. My great-grandfather stole pages from Morgan's ritual journals, the ones detailing how to break a binding. Morgan never knew they existed because Mills hid them, passed them down through our family. "The severing," I said, remembering Daniel's mention of missing pages. Sarah nodded. A counter-ritual that can break the bindings, but it needs certain conditions. She looked again at the storage closet. It only works when the binding is weak, when the usual patterns get messed up. The rules, I realized. If the rules maintain Morgan's system, then breaking them destabilizes it, Sarah finished. All of them simultaneously, creating a state of chaos that weakens the binding enough for the counter-ritual to work. A plan began forming in my mind. Morgan told me the rules were created by the first night guards to protect themselves from him, that each rule limits when and how he and the bound souls can manifest. Exactly. The 7-minute limit in exhibits prevents spirits from gaining strength. Following the music keeps people away from areas where the binding is weakest. Not unlocking doors after 3 a.m. prevents access to the most powerful artifacts. Every rule maintains a boundary that keeps Morgan's system stable. Thomas thumped against the door again, less forcefully now. "We don't have much time," Sarah said, tucking the small book back into her pocket. "Once midnight strikes, Morgan will know something's wrong when Thomas doesn't make his report. He'll come looking." "What do we need to do?" I asked. "I need access to Morgan's private collection room, the one behind the painting. That's where the binding is anchored. I'll perform the counter-ritual there while you create the chaos necessary to weaken the binding." "Break all the rules," I said, understanding. "Yes, systematically, dramatically break every single one. Draw Morgan's attention. Keep him focused on you while I complete the ritual." "It's dangerous," I pointed out. "Morgan's been killing people who interfere for decades." Sarah's face got serious. "My family has carried this burden for 3 generations, Alex. We helped create this abomination. We have to end it." She looked right at me. "But I can't force you to risk your life. This has to be your choice." I thought of Noah disappearing at the doorway, Lucy crying over her embroidery sampler, all the souls trapped for decades, feeding Morgan's twisted immortality, and Thomas, his mind messed up by Morgan's influence after years of loyal service. "I'm in," I said. "Tell me exactly what to do." Sarah smiled, looking relieved and determined. "First, we need to get to the security office for your equipment. Then I'll show you exactly which rules to break and where." As we moved away from the storage closet, Thomas's voice came again from inside, weaker but still with that weird double voice. "He knows, Alex. He always knows. You can't save them. You can't save yourself." We ignored him and hurried through the maintenance corridor toward the security office. I checked my watch. 11:48 p.m. 12 minutes until midnight when Morgan would be at his strongest. The security office was exactly as I'd left it. Morgan's journal copies still scattered across the desk. Sarah quickly gathered them while I grabbed my flashlight, radio, and keys. "The first rule," Sarah said, pointing to my handwritten list that had fallen to the floor. "Never stay in one exhibit for more than 7 minutes between midnight and 4 a.m. We need you to stay in the statue gallery for at least 15 minutes. That will cause the statues to fully animate." That's deliberately making them stronger, I realized, drawing power away from Morgan. Yes, each rule you break will fragment his control, forcing him to divert energy to contain the chaos. She checked her watch. "The counter-ritual will take me about 40 minutes to complete. You need to keep breaking rules, keep Morgan distracted until I can finish." "What if he comes after you instead of me?" "He won't," Sarah said grimly. "Morgan's pride is his weakness. He'll go after the guard who's actively dismantling his system before he'll confront a curator he doesn't consider a threat." She headed for the door. "I need to get to the collection room. You should go to the statue gallery and wait for midnight." "Good luck," I said. She stopped at the door. "The ritual might cause problems throughout the building. No matter what you hear or see, keep breaking the rules. Don't stop until you see the light." "What light?" "You'll know it when you see it." With that cryptic comment, she disappeared down the corridor. I got my equipment and went to the Classical Antiquities Gallery where I'd first seen the marble nobleman statue move. The museum felt different tonight. The shadows were darker and it was way too quiet. I felt like the exhibits were watching me from every corner. The statue gallery was super quiet when I got there. Marble figures stood still in classic poses, gods and heroes, nobles and warriors, all stuck in stone. I checked my watch, 11:59 p.m. In less than a minute, the first rule would be in effect. The second hand hit midnight, and right away, I felt the change. It got really cold, and I could see my breath in front of me. The security lights got dimmer, making the white marble figures harder to see. I sat in a corner where I could see the whole gallery and started to wait. 7 minutes was how long the rules said I could stay. I planned to stay at least twice that long. At exactly 7 minutes, the first marble head turned, the nobleman I'd seen before. This time, I watched as its blank eyes looked at where I was sitting. At 8 minutes, another statue moved. A Greek warrior, his spear and shield slightly changing position. By 10 minutes, every statue in the room had turned to face me. I was scared, but I stayed put. This was exactly what Sarah needed. The bound spirits getting stronger, taking energy away from Morgan's control. At 12 minutes, the first statue stepped off its pedestal. Stone feet scraped against the marble floor as the nobleman took a slow step toward me. The Greek warrior followed, then a robed woman, then others. Soon all the statues in the gallery were coming toward me, moving stiffly, but with clear purpose. I backed up toward the exit, keeping my eyes on them. This was enough. I'd broken the first rule big time. Time to move on to the next one. Rule number 2. Don't unlock doors that are already locked, especially after 3 a.m. It wasn't 3 a.m. yet, but according to Sarah, I needed to break the rules in order. The Egyptian wing was always locked after hours. It was the most secure part of the museum because of all its valuable stuff. I hurried through the hallways, the sound of stone feet scraping on marble getting quieter behind me. When I reached the Egyptian wing's massive doors, I pulled out my master key. The lock made a heavy click that seemed to carry through the entire museum. As soon as I pushed the doors open, I felt it, a rush of cold, old air hitting me. The Egyptian gallery beyond was dark except for the faint red glow of emergency lights. Sarcophagi lined the walls, their painted faces staring at me. Glass cases held canopic jars, ushabti figurines, and jewelry that looked dull in the low light. From somewhere in the darkness came a soft, repeating sound, like bandages unwinding. I remembered my last visit here, when I'd seen the linen wrappings form a human shape. This time I wasn't running. I walked right into the center of the gallery. My flashlight beam moving across Hierog. 1 month had passed since we freed the trapped souls from Morgan's binding ritual. The museum felt different now, quieter, more peaceful. The heavy feeling was gone. Now it was just quiet like any normal building. I still worked the night shift, but it was a completely different job now. No more watching the clock to avoid staying in one place too long. No more avoiding eye contact with things that shouldn't move. No more listening for my name called from the shadows. Just regular patrols through quiet galleries filled with history, not trapped spirits. We had a hard time explaining what happened after Sarah's spiritual cleansing. The physical damage, toppled displays, cracked cases, artifacts scattered across floors, was blamed on a small earthquake that somehow only hit our building. The museum board didn't buy it until they saw security footage of display cases falling and artifacts moving by themselves during my shift. None of us expected what happened next. 3 days after the binding was broken, some paranormal researchers showed up saying their equipment had picked up a huge energy spike at our location. They said they'd been tracking spiritual activity across the city for years and had never seen readings like these. Sarah let them in, but kept them away from anything about Morgan's real history. Their investigation hit the national news when they showed grainy footage of what they called dozens of ghosts floating up through the museum's roof. Most experts called it fake, but it brought tons of curious visitors. The board saw a chance in all this new attention and made Sarah the museum director. Her first move was to hire Daniel full-time to properly document Morgan's collections with their real historical backgrounds, not the supernatural stuff. I walked through the American History Wing with my flashlight. My watch showed 2:18 a.m. 1 month ago, I would have been checking it constantly, making sure I didn't stay too long in any one spot. Now I could take my time looking at artifacts without worrying. My radio crackled. "Alex, you there?" It was the new night guard trainee, Mark. He was at the security desk tonight. I pressed the talk button. "Go ahead. Just checking in. All quiet on your end?" "All quiet." I smiled to myself, wondering what Mark would think if I told him what not quiet had once meant in this building. "How's the monitoring station?" "Boring. Just how security should be, right?" "Right," I agreed. "I'll check in after I finish the East Wing patrol." The museum was just a museum now. The statues stayed on their pedestals. The Egyptian artifacts remained safely inside their sarcophagi. The paintings were just paintings, not doorways to hidden rooms. Sometimes I almost missed the strange encounters. Almost. I reached the Egyptian wing, where the destruction had been worst a month ago. Everything had been fixed now, the displays repaired and rearranged. Sarah had overseen the renovation herself, making sure Morgan's most valued collection was properly kept while removing any traces of his binding ritual. As I moved my flashlight across the walls with hieroglyphics, something caught my eye. Near the back wall, partly hidden by a column, sat a small stone tablet I hadn't seen before. It looked very old, covered in hieroglyphics, but it wasn't in a display case like the other artifacts. I walked up to it carefully, my years of security training making me wary of anything out of place. The tablet was about the size of a hardcover book, made of sandstone worn smooth at the edges. The hieroglyphics were crisp and clear, as if recently carved, arranged in neat rows across the surface. I took out my phone and snapped several photos, then called Sarah. Even though it was really late, she answered on the third ring. "Alex, is everything okay?" Her voice was alert, despite being woken up. "Everything's fine. Sorry to call so late, but I found something strange in the Egyptian wing. A tablet with hieroglyphics that wasn't here yesterday." There was a pause. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. While I waited for Sarah, I kept patrolling and was back in the Egyptian wing right when she got there. She had on jeans and a sweater with her hair quickly tied back and her keycard hanging around her neck. "Where is it?" she asked without preamble. I took her to the tablet, which was right where I'd found it. Sarah crouched down next to it, looking both worried and curious. "This definitely wasn't part of the collection," she said, carefully examining the stone without touching it. "The board would have informed me of any new acquisitions." "It appeared out of nowhere," I said, "like how things used to happen here." Sarah pulled out her phone and used its flashlight to better light up the hieroglyphics. "I can read some of this. My specialty is more European history, but I picked up Egyptian out of necessity because of Morgan's obsessions." She moved her finger above the symbols, making sure not to touch the stone. "It's a message of thanks," she said, speaking more quietly. "From people who were trapped and now free. They're at peace in the afterlife after being kept from it for so long." "The freed spirits sent this?" Sarah nodded, continuing to translate. "There's more. It says the tablet is a gift and a reminder that some bonds transcend both life and death." She looked up at me. "They're thanking us, Alex." I crouched next to her, looking at the very old symbols that somehow carried a very recent message. "Do you think they're really at peace now?" "I believe they are." Sarah stood up, her expression thoughtful. "This tablet is proof that breaking Morgan's binding didn't destroy them. It freed them to move on, just as we hoped." We took the tablet to Sarah's office, where she could work on the rest of the inscription without anyone bothering her. By the time my shift ended at dawn, she had figured out the entire message. "It's not just thanks," she explained as we sat in her office watching the sunrise through her window. "It's also a kind of closure. The spirits want to be remembered, not as trapped souls or as Morgan's collection, but as the people they once were." "We should do something," I said. "Create some kind of memorial." Sarah nodded slowly. "Not something public. The real story isn't something we can share widely, but a private exhibit, unmarked but accessible, something to honor them." Over the next week, Sarah, Daniel, and I worked evenings to create a small exhibit in one of the less used galleries. Daniel's research had found the real identities of many of Morgan's subjects, allowing us to tell their true stories. We put Noah's small toy soldier in the display, found in storage where Morgan had kept it after tying the boy's soul to it. Lucy's embroidery sampler sat nearby, showing how good she was at stitching even when she was so young. Each item had a small card with just a name and dates. The tablet we placed in the middle of the display, its message of thanks serving as the exhibit's only explanation. 2 weeks after we created the memorial, Thomas announced his retirement. The board held a small ceremony honoring his 30 years of service. He looked happy as he shook my hand with no memory of what happened that night. "You'll do well as senior guard, Alex," he told me, his eyes clear and peaceful in a way they'd never been before. "Just keep things boring. That's the secret to good security." "I'll do my best," I promised, knowing that boring was exactly what we all wanted now. My promotion to Thomas's position came with new responsibilities, including training future night guards. The first thing I did was write a new set of rules, not the weird, supernatural warnings that had once been necessary, but simple guidelines about respecting the artifacts and understanding the building's layout. Rule 1. Respect the history within these walls. Everything here has a story to tell. Rule 2. Regular patrols keep you alert and ensure nothing is missed. Rule 3. Document anything unusual, no matter how small it seems. Rule 4. Remember you're protecting not just objects, but the legacy they represent. Rule 5. Take time to learn about the collections you guard. Understanding their value helps you protect them better. Rule 6. Never forget that in the quiet night hours, you're part of the museum's ongoing story. The trainees thought these guidelines were just normal security stuff. Only Sarah, Daniel, and I knew they were also a nod to what had happened here, a way of remembering the past without letting it control us. Life at the museum got back to normal. The paranormal researchers eventually moved on to other places, though they still asked to come back sometimes, always leaving bummed out when nothing weird happened. The flood of curious people died down, replaced by the regular groups of school kids and tourists we'd always had. Daniel's work on Morgan's collection showed some cool historical connections that had nothing to do with soul binding. Sarah used his findings to make new exhibits that told the real stories behind the artifacts, showing their place in history instead of focusing on the supernatural stuff. On quiet nights during my rounds, I sometimes stopped in the memorial gallery we'd created, looking at the items that had once trapped souls. They were just objects now: a toy soldier, an embroidery sampler, a pocket watch, with none of their old power since Morgan's binding was gone. Sometimes I'd hear something just barely, soft violin music playing somewhere far away, but unlike before, I didn't feel like I had to follow it. It was just there, kind of like background noise. One night, about a month after finding the tablet, I was in the memorial gallery when Sarah joined me, carrying 2 coffee cups. She handed one to me and stood next to me, looking at the display. "Sometimes I wonder if we should tell someone," I said, sipping the hot coffee. "The whole story, I mean, about what really happened here." Sarah shook her head. "Who would believe it? And what good would it do? The souls are free. Morgan is gone. The binding is broken. Sometimes the best way to honor history is to let it rest." "I suppose you're right." I looked at the hieroglyphic tablet. It's strange to think that just a month ago I was terrified of this place after dark. Now it's just peaceful. That's all they wanted, Sarah said softly. Peace. A chance to move on. She touched the glass covering Lucy's embroidery sampler. My great-grandfather would be proud to know his family finally set things right. We stood in comfortable silence. The museum around us was packed with artifacts, some with known history and others still a mystery. I've been thinking of writing it all down, I admitted. Not for publication or anything, just to have a record of what really happened. That's not a bad idea, Sarah said, turning to look at me. History deserves to be remembered, even the parts we can't explain. I finished my coffee and checked my watch. Time to continue my patrol. Have a good night, Alex, Sarah said as she headed back to her office to work late, as she often did. You too, I replied, watching her go before turning back to the display. In the quiet of the gallery, I reached out and touched the frame holding Noah's toy soldier. Sleep well, I whispered to whatever might be listening. There was no answer, no movement, nothing strange. Just the quiet of a building full of history, not scary ghosts. The museum had plenty of stories to share. Regular stories about art and old things people made and saved. And I was here to listen, not scared anymore of what might be hiding in the dark corners.